Greetings! In this video we will continue our overview of the Maya interface. On the upper right hand side we'll find the workspace and we'll make sure that's set to Maya Classic. We'll come down to the bottom right corner and we'll click on the shortcut to Preferences and we'll just restore our default settings. Edit, Restore Default Settings. So for the first few weeks we'll be working exclusively in the Maya Classic workspace, and it's always a good idea to restore your default settings for these introductory lessons. And I'll go ahead and close that out. Now on the right hand side you should find your channel box, your modeling toolkit, and your attribute editor. If any one of those three wasn't available to you, you can use the icons up at the top here to make them available. I can click here on the first icon to bring about my modeling toolkit. The third icon is our attribute editor, and the fifth icon is our channel box. So just make sure that your channel box, modeling toolkit, and attribute editor are available there, and you can make them available by clicking on their icon. If we can switch between by clicking on the tab, and if you wanted to minimize, you can just click the tab that's currently active and it will minimize. And click it once again to bring it back. Modeling toolkit, we could minimize that. Attribute editor, we could minimize that. I'll leave it on the channel box and we'll get to the channel box in just a moment. On the other side, on the left hand side, we'll find the outliner, and it is the same procedure. We can click on the tab to minimize it, click on it to maximize it, and if the outliner wasn't available to you for some reason, this is the icon that will show or hide the outliner. So as we look here, we have channel box, modeling toolkit, attribute editor. You can turn those on here if they were off. And we have our outliner available to us, and you could click here to make that available if it was off. Let's take a quick look across the top, and I'll note here you can just leave your cursor on any one of these icons to see what it does. So here's our new scene, here's open scene, here's save scene, and then these two arrows are pretty important. This is the undo, and that corresponds with the lowercase z on the keyboard. So I don't have to hold anything else, I can just tap the Z key to undo. And this is redo, and if I were doing it on the keyboard, it would be Shift Z or capital Z to redo. This icon represents the object mode, and this icon represents the component mode. And we'll be talking more about object and component in a moment, and we'll be really diving in deep over the coming weeks between making selections and manipulations in object mode versus component mode. And we can switch between object mode and component mode here. You can switch between object mode and component mode by right-clicking the object, and then if we take a look in the modeling toolkit, you have the ability, this is the object mode, and then these are components. So you could switch to the component, switch back to the object here as well. So three places, object mode, component mode here, right-click the object to switch between object and component, or use your modeling toolkit to switch between object or any one of the components. And we'll review that in this video and in upcoming videos. We'll come out here. This is our snapping menu, and the first three we'll be using right off the bat. The first is grid snapping, second is curve snapping, and the third is vertex snapping or point snapping. And that corresponds nicely on the keyboard. There is X for grid snapping, C for curve snapping, and then V for vertex or point snapping. Next, let's take a look at symmetry. If you wanted to select one side of an object and have it highlight on the other axis side, you can determine that axis here. It's also available to you on the modeling toolkit, and you can see that if we say object X appears here, and if we were to, in this menu, turn it off, it also turns it off up here. These are important. These are our rendering options, viewing the last render. This is our hypershade shortcut, and that's about it for the top. That's all we'll need to get going in terms of our interface. Let's create an object and talk about the transform and navigation tools. So here is our series of shelves, and the poly modeling is currently available. I can see here surfaces, sculpting, rigging, etc. Make sure your poly modeling is active, and let's go ahead and create a cube. So I'll just click on that and it creates a cube at the origin. And I'll come and make the channel box active. And the origin simply means that translate X, Y, and Z are all set to 0. And so this is the center of our universe, if you will, the center of our scene. And this cube is sitting at the origin, 0, 0, 0. A couple of keyboard shortcuts that are really helpful. The F key will frame or focus whatever is selected. So sometimes, especially as you're getting used to navigating, let's say you lose your view. We can come into the outliner, we can select the polycube here that we just created, and then hit the F key with our window active. We'll hit the F key, and that will frame or focus the object. And note, I had to make my window active. So clicking here in the empty space of the open panel will make that active, and then our keyboard shortcuts will work. So I kind of navigated away. I clicked off. I want to hit the F key, so I'll make the panel active. I have the object selected, and I can hit the F key, make that panel selected. And there it is in the center. A quick review of our navigation. The Option key on the Mac, I'm working on a Mac, or the Alt key on the PC, in conjunction with your left mouse button, you can see I'm rotating around. The Option or Alt in conjunction with your middle mouse button allows you to track up, down, left, right. And the Option key or the Alt on the PC with your right mouse button allows you to zoom in and out. Now, if you have a scroll button as your middle mouse button, you can also use that to zoom in and out. My Mac mouse doesn't have that, and so I'm using the Option right mouse button to zoom in and out. Once again, Option Alt left, Option Alt middle, Option or Alt right to zoom in and out. And that's how we're navigating. So you want to take some time just to practice and get the hang of using those combinations of Option left, middle, or right. And on the PC, that's Alt left, middle, right. Something else to mention here. This is the axis direction, and currently we can see that the green line is Y, that is up, and opposite the line would be negative or down. Here we see the Z, and the line is on this side, so that's positive Z, and this is the front by default in Maya. Almost all of the menu items assume that you're working Z forward with positive X as the left-hand side. So positive X is our left-hand side, and if we went in the negative X direction opposite that line, that would be on the right-hand side of the object. And you can see with a simple scene like this, let's say we're working, you might not notice that you're upside down. So you want to get in the habit of just keeping an eye on the axis directions here. I can see that now Y is upside down, and so I am upside down. So we want to rotate that back around. Again, that's my Option left or Alt left on the PC. And then we can rotate around. And this is the default starting point for most of the work that you'll do in Maya. Certainly most of the work that we'll be doing this first semester. So Z forward, Y up, X on the left-hand side. Now, in terms of our transform tools, and if you think back to geometry, transform means translate, rotate, or scale collectively. So we have keyboard shortcuts across the top that correspond here. The Q key is our select tool. So anytime you're making a selection, just tap the Q key and you'll get into the select tool. There are two additional selection tools that don't correspond to the keyboard. This is the paint select and this is the lasso select. We'll be using those eventually, but not here at the beginning. Here is our move tool or translate tool. Remember, collectively, transform is translate, rotate, and scale. So if we were moving or translating, we would have this tool selected, and that corresponds with W on the keyboard. The rotate tool corresponds with E on the keyboard. I can hit the R key, and that gives us the scale. And note that they are color-coded. So when I pick my translate tool, right, Y is up, Z is forward, and the red X is on the left. And if I click in the middle, it allows me to move in any direction, omnidirectionally. I'm going to tap the Z key to undo that just to get it back to 0. I can click on an arrow and constrain myself in that direction. So you can see I'm constrained on the X. Here I am 2.175 in the positive X. Here I am negative 3.163 on the negative X. Sorry if I said that backwards. Positive X, negative X. I'll hit undo, or you could just come in and type the number to get that back to the origin. Likewise, here I am in positive z, 2.18, negative z, negative 2.293. I can type a 0 to bring this back to the origin. And the same goes for positive y and negative y, up and down. The rotate tool has actually 4. This outer ring is very rarely used in the perspective window. It's rotating at a right angle to your current view. So you're much more likely to use one of the color code. Here we are rotating on the Z, and you can see that there. I'll tap the Z key. Here we are rotating on the X, and you can see that value changing there in the channel box. I'll tap the Z, and and rotating on the Y. So rotating around on the Y, you can see that positive to negative there in the channel box. I can tap the Z to undo, or I can put a 0 in the field of the channel box. And let me take a moment here just to denote the language. This is the attribute. So if the instruction called for you to click on the rotate Y attribute in the channel box, you'd be clicking there. If an instruction called for you to click on the rotate Y field, you'd be clicking there. So as I was changing those values, I was clicking in the field. There are instances when you want to click on the attribute to perform some function. So just in terms of language, this is the rotate Y attribute. This is the rotate Y field. All right, and then scale, same. If we go from the middle, that will omni-scale, right? So we're scaling proportionately in all 3 axis directions. I'll tap the Z to undo. And then if we click on one of the colors, here we are scaling on the Z, and if we wanted to, again, click in the field and we wanted to make that 5 times as long, we could click there. And if we want to get everything back in terms of the scale, this would be just inserting a 1 there. Now, before we move on, let me just mention one other thing. I'm going to come back to the scale tool. And you can see that the last time I moved this, it was on the Y. And so now I am constrained on the Y, right? So if you want to get back to moving omnidirectionally, click in the middle. And there are many instances, especially when you're snapping, that you want to either snap in all directions or have the ability to snap in all directions, or you only want to snap in one direction. So here we could snap in any direction. If I were to click there and now that's yellow, I'm limited. Here I'm limited on the X, here I'm limited on the Z. If I want to take off that limit, I click in the middle and I can see all 3 of the colors, the blue, the red, and the green. If any one of your arrows is yellow, you're constrained on that direction. And when we get to snapping, that will make a little more sense, but I just wanted to plant that seed. And I moved my translate X a little bit, so I'll put that back to 0. Okay, let's talk about the object mode and component mode. I mentioned a moment ago that we can switch back and forth 3 ways, and so let's take a look at that. Here, this is green, and just for a quick second, I'm going to make a second cube just to demonstrate. If I grab 2 items, or 2 or more items, they will be green, and then the previous selections will be white. So white and green, those colors represent that our surfaces are selected in object mode, our geometry is selected in object mode, and our transform tools will work as objects. I'll go ahead and delete that extra one. So green and white, right? Green when we have a singular selection. I can right-click to come into the component mode, and it gives me my vertex. And now when I use my transform tools, it is affecting just the component. Now I can't rotate or scale a singular point. I can move a singular point, but I wouldn't be able to use my rotate tool, right? This is a one-dimensional item, and I cannot scale a one-dimensional item. But I could come, I'm going to tap the Q key, I could select 2 vertexes, and then if I rotate, right, I'm rotating the relative position of those vertices. And then we can scale and scale the relative position of those vertices. And this is called deforming. So I'm transforming the components in order to deform the object. If we wanted to lower this, right, and create some type of shape. And you'll note here, we have vertexes, edges, and faces. And if you're selecting something other than the vertex, you're probably better off, I'm going to switch this back to component mode, using a right-click shortcut. So I can right-click, and we can see here edge, vertex, face, and then this is how I can get back to object mode. So let's right click and choose vertex, and it selects the last vertex, and we can use any of our transform tools on those and deform the object. Now, selecting two vertexes is the equivalent of selecting a singular edge. So we could pick that edge there and transform it. And then if we right click and choose a face, right, that's the equivalent of 4 vertices or 4 edges. And we can manipulate or deform the object this way as well. So you want to take a moment, create a primitive object. In this case, I just have a cube here, and practice right clicking, choosing edge, transforming the edge, choose a vertex or vertices and transform those. Choose a face and use your transform tools to manipulate that. And when we manipulate the components, that's technically considered deforming the object. We'll right click and pull off, and the third way that we can switch between object mode and component mode is in the modeling toolkit. So here is the icon for object, here's our vertex or vertices, here's our edges, and here's our faces. And then this icon allows you to select multiple vertices, edges, or faces simultaneously. And again, I'll right click to 2 o'clock to get back to object mode, or I could have just clicked here. So just quick review, switching between object mode and component mode. We have object mode and component mode here. The most often used will be right clicking, edge, face, vertex, and when you want to get back to object, it's right click to about 2 o'clock object mode. And I'll just mention this is kind of based on a clock, so 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and we'll call object mode about 2 o'clock there. So here I am back in the object mode. All right, a couple of pitfalls in terms of the keyboard. A lot of times you'll accidentally get symmetry on, or you'll have symmetry on and you'll forget. So again, if I have object X on and I just wanted to click that vertex and they're both showing up, don't forget that you need to check to see if your symmetry is off or on, depending on what you want. The other is soft select, and soft select comes on with the B, and I'm going to actually create a sphere to demonstrate this. So I'm going to delete this, just simply select it in object mode and tap the delete key. And let's create a poly sphere. Now, if I pick a vertex, let's say we pick that pole vertex right there, and I'll tap the W key to get my move tool, and when I raise that, it's just moving the only component that I have selected, which is this vertex. I'm going to hit undo. Now I'm going to tap the B key, and you can see that we have a yellow to red gradient, and that gives us fall off. So you can see the gradient is covering the entire object. I'm going to hold the B key, and with my left mouse button, I'm going to scrub left. And you can see that the fall off, that blue circle, is scaling down. So I'm holding the B key and I'm pulling my left mouse button to the left. If I hold down the B key and hold down the left mouse button and scrub to the right, it's making it larger. So I can determine the fall off of my soft select. And so let's say we were making, I don't know, an egg shape. We can have that fall off. I've only got one vertex selected, but with soft select on, and I turn that on by just tapping the B key, we have this fall off that's represented from yellow to red. And right, we can change the size of the fall off by scaling it here. I mention this as a common pitfall because sometimes students will forget or not realize that they have soft select on. So they may want to just move that vertex, but it's moving all of these fall off vertexes. So just tap the B key. So I'm going to tap that, right? This is just one-to-one. Whatever I select is selected. Those yellow vertexes, right, are just moving at a one-to-one correlation to my transform tool. When I tap the B key, now we have some fall off and we can deform the object. Now if I make a better selection, let's make a uniform selection, you can see that you can create some interesting shapes from the primitives using the soft select. One other common pitfall with the soft select is sometimes the soft select fall off is so large that when you hold down the B key and scrub left or right, you don't see anything happening. That's because that blue circle is larger than your screen. If that happens to you, you can double click the tool that you're using, and we can come down to the soft selection, and you can manually change the fall off. So sometimes this number, maybe you were previously working on a very large object and you had this massive fall off. And now you're using the soft select on a very small object and you're unable to see that blue circle. So you can just bring this down or you can hit reset. You can see that by default it's starting with a 5. And so that is the 5. Let's zoom out even a little bit more. So that is the circle, right? We can see it because we've zoomed way out, but if we were way in here and we held down the B key and you're scrubbing left and right and it appears as though nothing's happening, it's just that that circle of influence or the fall off is scaling, but it's out of your view. And if we scale way out, right, we can see that default 5. So if you've got a great big one, you could zoom all the way out, or probably more practical, double click the tool you're using, come to soft select, hit reset, or just maybe even put in a 1 if it was very small. And now we can see that change. And you can get some really interesting manipulations using that soft select. So one other thing to practice, using the soft select, and I'll just review that real quick. Let's create a sphere. Let's make a uniform selection. So I'll grab there. We can see that it's uniform. I can see that soft select is on because it has this gradient, yellow to orange to red. If I tap the B key, right, it's off, and that just moves 1 to 1. I'll hit undo, and if I tap the B key, now it's on, and we're having this fall off. Hold the B key, scrub left to make the fall off smaller. Hold the B key, scrub right to make the fall off larger. That is soft select. Now we're not going to be using soft select in the next couple of weeks. We'll have some soft select lessons coming up. I mention this here up front because sometimes a student will inadvertently hit that B key and then be confused as to why things are not behaving predictably. Also, using the soft select, that very common idea of the circle being larger than your view and being a little bit confused about why the B key isn't working because your circle of selection or your fall off indicator was larger than your view. So some common pitfalls there. Go back, make sure you were taking notes during that so that you can quickly refer to your notes without having to come back and watch the entire video. But that may take you a few sessions of watching and getting familiar with the interface. And in the next video, we'll set up some projects and emphasize what we've learned here. Okay, have a great day.